Do offensive coordinator changes actually negatively affect quarterbacks and NFL offenses overall? We're going to talk about that in today's video. As always, like and subscribe if you could. I appreciate all the love we've been getting lately. Lots of subscribers and views and likes and comments from you guys. We're going to continue to put up content all year long, dynasty content, regular fantasy football content. It is currently Monday, January 22nd, so the divisional round of the playoffs is done, which means we only have 3 more football games left of the 2023/2024 playoffs, which is sad. But as we know, football is a year-round sport. Shortly after the Super Bowl, you start getting free agency stuff coming up. And after free agency, we get the draft, and then we have training camp. So it's a year-round sport for sure. Which I'm excited to talk about. And it's nice in the off season. We get to put out more of these research style videos that, I've been putting out last off season and this one. And this is kind of one of a video of many that I hope to do of this myth busting idea of just things we hear all the time. And we kind of just take it as truth because we hear it. And I've never really seen people actually give you the numbers and the research behind it. And so that's kind of the point of today's video. Things like revenge games for receivers or running backs playing against their old teams. Are they a real thing? I hopefully get to look into that this offseason. And one of them is in today's video is offensive coordinator changes. Something we hear all the time is, when a coordinator changes from one to another, that it generally negatively affects the quarterback or the overall offense. It takes time for them to adjust to the new system and all that. And, that's something as I've kind of taken as gospel, like, yep, this is true. This is going to happen. And so I decided to kind of research it and see if it was true. So what I did, just to kind of give you guys the layout of the research that I did here, is I went back to 2010. So, the last, 14, 15 seasons or so. And I looked at offensive coordinator changes from one year to another and how that affected the quarterbacks and their stats and the overall offenses. So now I did put some criteria that you had to meet in order for me to look through these. Is one, that coordinator had to have been in place for at least 2 years or more. Okay, so I didn't take any coordinator that was only there for a year and then they changed coordinators, because I just feel like, one, that probably means the coordinator wasn't very good. So that could have, negatively skewed the numbers a little bit. And two, I just feel like when you have a quarterback in a system for 2 or more years, that's when the change really affects them, because, you get used to things just like we do in everyday life, right? We get used to how things work after a certain amount of time. And then when it changes, it takes time to adjust. And I feel like, I don't know, it's just me thinking off the top of my head, but I just feel like, when you're in a system for at least 2 years or more, that's when the change is a little bit more drastic. So the coordinator had to have been there for 2 years or more. And also the quarterback had to have been the same. Okay. So if the coordinator was there for 3 years and then there was a coordinator change, but also the quarterback was different, I didn't take those into account, right? So obviously I think that makes sense. That's kind of self-explanatory. But if you have a whole completely different quarterback, then that doesn't really, that's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for the same quarterback in place with their coordinator for multiple years, and then there was a change. And does that negatively affect them? So, we're going to get into it. I'm going to share my screen with you guys, an Excel sheet where I went back and looked at all these. And I think the numbers are interesting and a little surprising. So let me just share this with you guys here so you can have something to look at. There's a lot of numbers and things like that, which I'll try and to explain a little bit. I know maybe it's a little hard to see or comprehend, but you can see on the left side, we have the team. Went through each team from 2010 on. The quarterback that was there from 1 year to the other, the years where the change happened, Chargers, Phillip Rivers, 2011 to 2012. And then I put the years, their yards, the total yards, passing yards they had before and then after. So obviously if it's in red, there was a dip in the yards, as you can see here, pretty significant dip. 1,000 yards is pretty significant. Touchdowns year before, year after. Again, 27 26, not really a huge difference there. 1 touchdown that's not a lot. It's when you start getting like a few. I put their fantasy points per game for the quarterback. So 15.9 in 2011 for Phillip Rivers, 13 in 2012. And then I put the overall offense. As you can see here, their years before, their total points per game at 25. And then the years after, their total points per game. So the offense took a dip here, as you can see. It should just be 22. I took away decimals. Halfway through, I was like putting decimals, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take away decimals. Anyways, I'm not going to go through and change all the decimals. You guys can see there. So yeah, you can see the year of the total offense, the points per game the offense was scoring, and then the offensive coordinator, and then what happened to them, which we'll get into in just a second. Did they retire? Or did they get fired? Were they just kind of like mutually parting ways, like Eric Bieniemy? I feel like that was kind of a mutual thing. He could have stayed in Kansas City if he wanted to. Was he hired as a head coach? All that stuff. So what I found, well, first thing, there was only 46 instances of this, which I was a little surprised. I thought it would be more. You can see it goes down to row 47 here with the Panthers, obviously starting at row 2. So only 46 instances. I thought that was a little surprising. I guess with my qualifiers, it makes sense a little bit. The teams like the Browns and the Jets, where they were just changing coaches every year, quarterbacks every year. Obviously, they didn't get on the list that much. Or there's a team like the Saints who've had the same offensive coordinator there. I think they're changing finally, but he's been there since like 2008 or something, the same offensive coordinator. So, so what I found here, you can see if the team name is in red, that means that they generally had a negative season. Like I said, the Chargers 2011 overall, their offense went down. Chargers 2015 to 2016, their offense actually went up. The passing yards went down, but the touchdowns went up by 4. The fantasy points went down by 1.5, but the overall offense went up by 6 points more per game. So if it's in green, that means the quarterback and their offense kind of generally had a better season, I would say, for the most part. If it's highlighted in yellow, that means there was a coaching change. That means a whole coach was fired, and usually offensive coordinators get fired when coaches get fired. And then there's a few here that are in orange, as you can see, like the Bills in 2021 to 2022. And what that means is there's not really not a significant change here, as you can see for Josh Allen from between 2021 and 2022. Okay, he passed for about 150 more yards. Not very significant over a 16, 17 game season. One more touchdown, again, that could be very fluky. Basically the same fantasy points per game. And then the offense was basically only a point per game difference there. So not a whole lot of change, I would say. Oh, and one other thing, if a quarterback did miss a few games, I statted their numbers out for their 16-game projection, or 17-game if it was in a season with 17 games. Now, I didn't include, if there was seasons where it was the same quarterback, it would fit the criteria, but the quarterback missed half or more of the games. I excluded those. I just feel like you can get it kind of go against the purpose of this video a little bit. So, if a quarterback was hurt for 8 games, 9 games or something, I didn't include them. If they missed just 2 or 3 games, I gave their stats over what their 16 or 17 game projection was. So again, 46 instances of this happening, and I have the totals here, right here, 46 instances, 50. Let me zoom in a little bit for you guys. 54% of these where this happened, the quarterback and the offense or both kind of went down. It was a bad season the next season. So 54%. 37% was actually good and 9% was even. So I was actually a little bit surprised by this. I thought it would be more about 60-40 or 65-35. Really, it's 54 versus 46% of either about the same production or better. Not a whole lot of difference there, right? So kind of a myth in that sense. I think most people take this as like coordinator change, especially for a guy that's been there for a while. It's bad for the quarterback. And no, overall, it wasn't. So I decided to dive a little bit deeper into this. And I highlighted specifically where there was a coordinator change, but the coordinator was hired as a head coach, because I think that's significance, right? If a coordinator is fired, and I use the term fired a little loosely, there was a lot of cases where they just didn't renew their contract. Their contract is up and they didn't renew it. So technically they didn't fire them. But to me, it's like, all right, if you're not renewing their contract, it kind of means you don't want them there because you don't think they're going to doing a good job or whatever. So I kind of took that as like they're essentially firing you without firing you. So I did highlight the situations where the offensive coordinator was hired as a coach. So the offensive coordinator was there for a while and it was hired as a head coach, because generally, if you're hired as a head coach, that means you're doing a good job, right? So I highlighted those and I looked at the numbers, okay? And you can see them right here. There was actually only 14 instances of this where an offensive coordinator, fit this criteria and was hired as a head coach. And if you look at the numbers here, the averages go down quite a bit. And sorry, I didn't mention the averages between, the other 46. So you can see here, these are the averages that I'm highlighting here. So the passing yards, they went down by about 100, 120 or so, not very significant. Passing touchdowns went down by about 2 on average. Fantasy points went down about just over 1 point per game, and the offensive points per game for the teams went down by 1. So not really a huge difference, right, between these offensive coordinator changes. Now, I took that again for coaches, for these coordinators that were hired as head coaches, 14 instances here. You can see the averages over almost 250 yards less in passing yards. That's where it starts getting significant. 5 less touchdowns on average. That's pretty significant. That's 30 fantasy points or 20 if you play in 4-point. Their fantasy points per game went down by over 2, about 2.3. And then the offensive points per game went down by 3, which is significant. 3 points less per game is very, very significant. Go back and look at how many times a team loses by 3 or less points. It's significant. So, as you can see here, these are the coordinators. They're all hired as head coaches. So I took these numbers, 14 total instances of this. 71% the next season for that team and quarterback was bad. 14%, 71% bad, 14% good, 14% even. So we're looking at about a 70-30 split here, essentially. That's more significant in my opinion. That's the numbers I was expecting overall. So it makes sense, right? Offensive coordinators, they leave for many reasons. Well, 2 main reasons. They get fired or they get hired, right? And so if we're taking in the guys that get fired, it probably means you weren't very good, and it probably means there's a good chance that you bring in a better offensive coordinator, right? If you get hired, it means you were a good coach, and so it makes sense, right? You can see the instances here. The 2 instances where it was good, one of them was Mike Mularkey for the Falcons. He was their offensive coordinator in 2011, got hired as the Titans head coach, and he was only the Titans head coach for 1 year, so maybe it's a situation of like, how good was Mike Mularkey really? So, I mean, there's a qualifying thing there. But I think another question people are going to ask is, well, how many cases of this where the head coach was an offensive-minded guy? And so I highlighted that in orange. And you can see here, there's 6 of the 14, so almost half of them were offensive-minded coaches. And the other 8 were defensive or special teams coaches. So you can't even make that excuse of like, well, if it's an offensive-minded head coach, then maybe there's not much of a difference. No, you can see here almost half of the situations where the offensive coordinator was hired as a head coach, you had offensive coaches in place. So I do think this is actually pretty significant information. It can help us in fantasy football. There's going to be, I think, a couple cases this year where we're going to get some offensive coordinators that have been in place. Maybe 1 or 2 offensive coordinators that have been in place that go on to get head coaching jobs. The biggest one I can think of is Ben Johnson for the Lions. I think he's going to get a head coaching job as soon as the Lions either get eliminated or after the Super Bowl. I think there's a good chance that Ben Johnson, he was already rumored to get a head coaching job last season. I think he kind of wanted to wait, give himself another year. So he's been with Goff for the last 2 years. Their offense have actually been pretty good. There's a good chance he's gone. there's a good chance that the Lions offensively, they dip a little bit. Now, Dan Campbell is an offensive coach, right? How much does he have say into what the offensive game plan and system is? I don't know, but there's a good chance that the offensive numbers for the Lions and specifically for Jared Goff go down next year. So keep that in mind. Another one that I've heard a lot is Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator for the Texans. Now, this one's a little different because obviously he's only been there a year. He hasn't been there multiple years. So he actually wouldn't fit our criteria that we went over in this video. But, he's obviously, if you're getting hired as an offensive coordinator or as a head coach after 1 year being a offensive coordinator for the Texans, then you're probably pretty good, right? So there's that. I mean, does the Frank Smith from the Dolphins, does he get looks as a head coach? I think people are going to see the Dolphins and they're going to potentially say, hey, we want that, and maybe they hire McDaniels is offensive coordinator, and he's been there for a couple years. So keep in mind this. I don't know how many instances of this are we going to get? Maybe just a couple, but the Lions is the big one, potentially the Texans, potentially the Dolphins, and maybe there's someone else out there that I'm not thinking of that could get hired. So hopefully that helps you guys. Hopefully you find it interesting. I always find these things interesting. It takes me a little while to do these researches, not a whole lot of time, but it takes me a decent amount of time. But it's interesting to me. I like numbers. I like stats. And, again, I'm trying to disprove or prove these things that we hear all the time that we just kind of take for gospel. So, again, hopefully that helps you guys. As always, like and subscribe. We'll be putting out more of these videos throughout the off season. I appreciate you guys, and we'll catch you guys next time.